Now let's move on to mobile money. Financial inclusion through mobile money is an agenda promoted by Nigeria Central Bank. It's also set to be a big part of the transformation of Nigeria's agriculture sector as small farmers leverage on improving technology. After the central bank issued licenses to operators in 2011, the mobile money concept has kicked off in Nigeria. And I'm joined in the studio by Tayo Obiosu. He's the CEO of Paga, one of Nigeria's leading mobile money transfer companies. Thank you so much, Paga. I called you Paga just there.
No worries.
Tayo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
All
you.
right, so I think I'll just go straight to it. And
Sure.
we've seen the dramatic success of mobile money in Kenya.
Yeah.
Everybody talking about M-Pesa. It's a model that has been copied in several parts of the world now. So your thoughts on the potential? We've seen mobile money for about 2 years now in Nigeria, and from what you're reading in the early stages, do you think we could see another M-Pesa type phenomenon in Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much for having me, first of all. We are seeing a phenomenon that is more than M-Pesa, actually. And the story is just not being told.
Right.
Last year, as you mentioned, the central bank issued licenses in November of 2011. And I think there are 18 companies licensed today. So last year was, for Paga, as one example, our first full year licensed. And in that year, we grew 850%. We have grown dramatically since then. We now have about 660,000 users on our platform.
Right.
We are growing faster than M-Pesa ever grew its first full year, and in a much tougher environment. Right? M-Pesa in Kenya was an environment where the telco, Safaricom, owned 95% of the market, pretty much. And yet we grew faster than M-Pesa in a much tougher environment.
But
I was
is that
looking at
growth rate sustainable in your view?
I think it's
Many
sustainable.
people say you're starting from a pretty low base.
Correct.
But
so I think we start from a pretty low base. So we started the year at 40,000 users, which actually is not that far from where they started their first full year.
Right.
So we've actually done the comparison. Actually, it's a fair comparison to say we grew at 850, they grew at 600 or so in their first full year. In this year, I'll tell you, we're already north of 150% in now growth.
Right.
And so I expect the year to end about 200, 300% sort of growth for us. We are seeing every minute 8 people are using Paga. Every minute. And I was just comparing recently the transactions on point of sales across Nigeria to our progress. So last month, there were 640,000 transactions on point of sales across Nigeria.
Right.
And on Paga alone, there were over 300,000 transactions.
Right.
So in terms of volume, the point of sales did 11 billion, we did 3 billion.
Right.
So, I mean, for something that has only been around for a year, we're making really good progress.
Right.
And I think the story's not going out well enough. So the central bank is doing its part in making sure whenever we're talking about cashless Nigeria, mobile payments are included, in making sure that the numbers are publicly available, so that the public can see that people are actually using these services. And for us, it's been, the path we've seen so far gives us the confidence that that the thesis we went under in starting this business is correct.
But let me jump in and ask how profitable it is, because I know you have quite a few private equity investors.
Absolutely.
Private companies, so I imagine you probably won't be giving me too much detail.
Sure.
But it's a tough environment, like you mentioned, and I think that has been the concern of many.
Yes.
In this environment, do we have the infrastructure that can make it work, and can make it work in a cost-effective manner? What has been your experience there?
It is a very expensive business to be in. You have to be, you have to be in for the long term. I mean, this is a business where you need to invest north of $100 million to be successful. And we're fortunate that our investors are willing to make that kind of a bet.
Yeah.
The reality is that it could be a very profitable business, depending on how you run your business.
Right.
And the reality is also that you have to play a lot of role on the infrastructure side that you otherwise would not in other countries. I am confident that if you take our example in the US, PayPal, right, which is a comparison to Paga. If you take PayPal in the US, I'm confident PayPal has never laid a single line of fiber optic cable to any telco in the United States, while Paga has had to do that to all the telcos in Nigeria just to be able to provide a quality service. Right. And so those are expenses that you wouldn't face in other parts of the world, but if you face them here and you take them head on, you do have a chance to make a profit.
What's your thoughts on the future of mobile, particularly in Africa? A lot of people saying that is the technology for the future on this continent. So it's changing our lives in many ways, clearly. The internet, everyone is getting on the internet now. Broadband is becoming a little more available across the continent. And then, of course, when we look at things like the transformation that the government is trying to do in agriculture, the mobile phone is now being infused into all of that. Your thoughts on the strength of the mobile phone as a technology in Africa?
Well, I first put it that it's about mobility, not too much about the phone. I think there's too much emphasis placed on the phone itself.
Right.
Right. It's about internet connectivity, which is the key thing you mentioned there. Right. And I say to people, the day my wristwatch has internet, Paga is going to be on my wristwatch and services are going to be delivered. And last year on Kickstarter, a company has actually come out with a wristwatch that is internet enabled.
Right.
So it's about how do we get devices, low cost devices, to the mass market that get them connected. And the mobile networks are one very viable way of doing it. And I think it's mobile is going to be to Africa the way computing was to the Western world. There were two big transitions in the Western world. One was when IBM came out with a computer, and that changed from a productivity perspective a lot of our lives. And the second was when Cisco came out with the Internet Protocol.
Right.
Right. And I think that's the same. Those kinds of productivity gains we saw in the West are the kinds of gains we're going to be seeing with mobile here.
Right.
Whether it's ability for me to sit in my house and by SMS pay for a transaction online. Right. I like to talk about one of the online sites here. I've only bought once from them, but I actually paid at a Paga agent in my neighborhood.
Okay.
Just next to my house. I paid physically and I received my goods.
Right.
And this is an online store. So what mobility has allowed us to do is to break the barriers of the people you can serve. And I think in Nigeria, when we think of the consumer opportunity of Nigeria, mobility is going to help deliver that consumer opportunity if we have the right payment systems.
All right. I want you to just very quickly weigh in into this discussion around mobile and, of course, like I mentioned, the agri transformation we're seeing, and not just in driving commerce, like you mentioned, but public policy. I want to get your thoughts. Financial inclusion is something that the central bank is pushing very aggressively now. Your thoughts on where all this fits in?
First of all, in terms of financial inclusion, we are very strongly behind that, right? And I believe that there's an opportunity to bring low-cost financial services to the mass market through services like ours. We launched last month Paga Savings, which is a savings product at our agents. And in less than a month, we have over 1,000 users already on that platform. In 2 weeks of this month, they've already saved quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, I think overall it is,
Right.
and the agri sector particularly is one of the largest sectors in Nigeria, right? It's the largest employer in Nigeria. And I think there's an opportunity to use mobile phones to provide services to the agri sector. I do think it's important for people to know that, and we've engaged with various players along that chain, it's important for people to know that it takes time to change habits.
All right. Tayo, I really need to pause here, but thank you so much for joining us. I really need to move on the show, but very interesting perspective here. Tayo Obviously, the CEO of Paga, talking us through mobile money and mobile services in Nigeria.